Hello, welcome back. You are watching Insights live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Insights Raw News premiere news show, and we're here for our final episode of the year and our Christmas special. Well, I say Christmas, it's a de facto Christmas special of Raw News Insight. We're just going to be discussing today. Obviously, the new travel window the government's instituted, is it working? And what is university's plan for term 2? When are you coming back to school? We're also going to be discussing Shame on You, Warwick, and the new movement to get Warwick, or the return of a movement to get Warwick, finally take sexual assault and sexual harassment seriously on campus and provide adequate help for survivors and victims. We're also going to be talking about, of course, Brexit, because we couldn't end the year by discussing Brexit one last time. But before we get into any of that, I'll introduce my panel. I want us to highlight one thing. Raw and the board are interviewing Stuart Croft this Thursday, and we want your questions. If you're watching this on YouTube and Twitter, listen to the podcast, you should see in the description there's a link to submit questions for us to ask Stuart Croft. Please, we want your questions on any topic. For anything from serious as accommodation to what he wants to drink, like what he likes to drink with dinner. We want your questions because we want to put students' questions to Stuart Croft himself. I can't speak today. It's end of term. I'm far too tired. Let's bring in my guests. First, starting with Noah Keat. Noah, welcome to the stream.
Hello, Enoch. Brilliant to be back on Insight.
Yes. Normally I can speak better, but we'll have to go with this for now. Noah, it's been a while since you've been on the show. What have you been up to?
It is. I think I was sort of a regular guest up to about week 5, and then I realised that exams and essays were around the corner, and so hence, whereas future Mondays I'd love to be on here at 1:00 in the afternoon, I was instead either in the library or working away, reading, looking at articles, looking at books, just trying to sort of get to the end of each one and hope that within each article as much of it was a bibliography as possible, so it wouldn't be notes I'd have to take. But thankfully, just this morning, I've uploaded both of my final essays that are due in this term, so I feel sort of very satisfied and relieved. And I thought, I came on Insight a lot back in between, January and March when we were in the studio, been on it a lot earlier in the autumn, so I thought it'd be brilliant to come on the Christmas special, the final one of 2020.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people saying actually that this year feels like there's a lot more work to do because I also feel like despite the fact we're all working at home, I have a lot less free time now. Is something you notice as well?
Yeah, it really is. It sort of made me really appreciate the evenings where, have my dinner and maybe have sort of half an hour free where I wouldn't sort of be thinking about, work or whatever I do with my essays. It did feel like long working days, having been so used to the lockdown, just having like essays to submit, trying to balance that alongside watching lectures each week, going to seminars either in person or online. It was a lot to try and cobble together and something to try and get back into the habit of doing, not least when clearly, as we're going to talk about with what's going to happen next term, the sort of dynamics for learning and trying to understand the content and write as good an essay as possible are a lot different this year to any other year.
Yeah. Someone else who's sort of ripped away from their learning to come on the show. Nini, welcome to the stream.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be back.
Yeah, because you had a test tomorrow, don't you? And yet you still managed to come on today's stream. So no, you have no excuse clearly, because clearly the work can come second.
I've been slacking. I do apologise.
Whenever Insight's discussing Brexit, I am obligated to be here. After all, I've been told I am Insight's Brexit correspondent. But it has been a very busy term. I think you're absolutely correct. There has just been a lot more work this term. At least it feels as if there's been a lot more work this term. I think because the way asynchronous lectures work, that you can just take them whenever you want and watch them whenever you want, sort of makes procrastination a lot easier to do. And it sort of makes it feel like more of a task than just attending a lecture was last year. So it's just been a weird year, and I'm glad that we are nearing the end of it.
Yes. Yeah, 2020 has been a weird year. Time just declared 2020 the worst year ever, and it's not looking like things going to get any better anytime. Well, not very soon. We're going to be saying a very COVID Christmas this year. Now, many of you students have probably been spending last week getting poked and prodded and tested, so you can go home in this travel window. I want to ask Noah. Anyway, I know you haven't. You're not. But Noah, are you going home in the travel window?
I'll be going home tomorrow. So the travel window is between the 3rd of December and 9th of December. So tomorrow's the 8th, so it will be within that travel window. And I had my 2 COVID tests last week. I think given the short notice that the government provided, given what a logistical operation it is when each university has thousands of students, I think Warwick really pulled it off really well. I attended my first one on the Monday. There were long queues, but people being very helpful, checking that none of us had COVID symptoms because it was very symptomatic individuals, really sort of handing out forms, giving us the QR codes to fill in our information, and the medical students that were helping us with the test being really, really gracious, really friendly to every single person. If you think they're doing 5-7 days a week the same thing again and again for numerous students who they barely see because most of the time they're behind a mask. Actually, I thought it was handled really well. Both of my tests were negative, so I found it a very positive experience, and the real sort of cherry on the cake was getting that nice bit of flapjack as we left.
Oh, that does sound nice. Well, I want to ask you something, because you're an international student. These tests, these asymptomatic tests, were not valid for sort of international quarantine, that kind of thing. Do you feel like you, as an international student, have been probably taken care of by the uni and helped if you wanted to go home?
No, I really don't think so. I also don't think it's the university's fault, because simply it's just not in their control, I think. The university hasn't really done much, or if anything, with regards to helping me going home. At least I haven't heard anything from other international students too. The ones I know that are going home have sort of had to organize it logistically on their own. And for me, it just becomes a matter of, regardless of anything the university does, I'll need to do a 2-week quarantine when I land and a 2-week quarantine when I land back in England. And this is only a 4-week break. So regardless of anything the university can do, there's really nothing I can do to go home. And a few other international students feel the same way, especially the ones that live in faraway countries and, aren't sort of nearby. The problem simply becomes that regardless of how much asymptomatic testing they can do before your flight, you're still going to be on an airplane and in an airport, which will expose you or can expose you to the virus. So it just seems sort of logistically impossible for the university to do anything to help me here. The most they've done is just sort of ask me. And for the people that are staying by, we've been told that they'll have some events. I've been told they'll be screening Elf in the piazza for everyone to watch and just stuff like that, really. But it doesn't really do much to appease my homesickness. It doesn't really do much to help me in terms of logistics. But there's really nothing they can do in this regard.
Yeah. Well, I think obviously one of the big concerns I think you told me so before is that if you went back to India, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks, and you have the quarantine on the way back as well, and then you'll be back and you're spending another month in quarantine. But then I think we should also look ahead to sort of term 2 and the university's plans on what term 2 is going to look like, because obviously that affects travel choices now. So universities announced that based on government recommendation, which is we'll get into that in a second, they're going to be having a staggered start to in-person teaching in term 2, starting with freshers. Then after, I think, was it 2 weeks, third years and second years, and then sort of a staggered start. What do you both think about this? I'll come to you first, Noah.
Well, as a second year student, I was disappointed to learn that I think it's 3 weeks of online teaching before we have any in-person teaching, compared to just 2 weeks for first year students. And I thought that, obviously for every first year, they'll regard being at university as important, but just academically being in second and third year is more important. I think we all agree that in-person teaching is superior to online teaching, and I can't understand why that the staggered start wasn't the other way around. I'm not a massive fan of the staggered start in general. I've said before on Insight that I personally just learn better in person. It's more sort of attentive. I think sort of being in the classroom, it does just put me in a different mindset where I'm more focused on the work, whereas I'm just doing it at home in my bedroom, then I will just get distracted more easily and won't get as much out of the hour. So I think the university have tried to justify it by saying this is what the government want us to do and this is a staggered start that they've recommended, but I've spoken to other students who are similarly sort of unimpressed, and I'm sort of not impressed by it either.
Yeah, well, I think we'll get into some of the big disagreement there, but I think it's some people who take issue with the fact the government's advice seems to suggest the opposite of the course the university is taking. But if you want to know more about why Stuart Croft made this decision, you should ask him by putting a question in the Raw News question for Stuart Croft box, because the Raw and Raw are interviewing him on Thursday, and we would love your questions. I'm just saying that kind of spike in the audience. I want to get it out to them. Nino, I want to come to you. What do you think about this start? Because obviously you're going to be stuck in Leamington basically, and now you can't even have the face-to-face teaching for the first few weeks.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. on one hand, you see, I understand why we're taking a staggered start. I agree with the decision to have a staggered start. Like Noah said, I do wish the way it had been staggered had been reversed, so that second and third years go in person before the first years. But I understand maybe I'm just completely biased because I am a second year. But I do agree that the academic rigor just increases as the years go by, right? The the closer you are to your final year, the more academic rigor you're going to have. So it makes more sense to have the older students, or like the students in later years, have start sooner than the freshers. But yeah, like I said, it's just incredibly frustrating. But I do understand why there's been a staggered start. I understand it might not necessarily be in line with the government's regulations. So the uni isn't forced to do a staggered start, but I completely understand why they have. I mean, it's right after a vacation, so people will be flying in and driving back in from all over the country, all over the world. So it just seems safer to have a staggered start, so we can have some time, but it just obviously I don't like it. I hate online learning. I wish there was another solution, but with education, there's never a one size fit all. But yeah, no, I don't like it at all, and it leaves me frustrated, and I hate online learning, and I don't want to. I don't want to do it, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Now, one thing people are asking now is how it's going to impact the threat of strikes from the UCU. Obviously, they were tremendously unhappy with the blended learning choice the university made. They wanted no face-to-face teaching, all online where possible for for sake of teacher safety. Now, they were threatening to strike if in beginning of term 2 we weren't online. With this new staggered start, do you think that's going to affect the way they approach this, Noah?
Well, I'm sort of logistically unsure because what they've argued for is for online learning, but from what I've seen, maybe they have put out information. I'm unclear as to how long they want online learning for. So clearly, with these announcements, it's only going to be full online learning for the first 3 weeks of term, or actually even for lecturers, it will only be for like 2 weeks because they'll have first years to teach in person, at least for seminars. So I think it's unclear whether they'll affect them or whether actually they'll say we want online learning to go on for far longer. But I'm a huge supporter of trade unions. I'm a huge supporter of the right to strike, but I am unhappy with this decision because I think in the seminars that I've been in, they have been done safely. You have had people sitting apart. You have had social distancing, mask wearing, and I just know that from someone who is hearing impaired, I just get a lot more out of an in-person seminar. So I would disagree with them that teaching should be fully online for the foreseeable future. But I think they just need to be more clear about how long the UCU and the Warwick branch will want online teaching, and therefore whether this is going to affect at all their planned strike action.
Yeah, Nini, what do you think?
I think this will adversely affect the strike action. An important thing in a strike is collective bargaining, right? So a strike is a bargaining tool that is used by workers to demand better terms, right? So the thing with the strike is the ability for the workers to sustain themselves during the strike is incredibly important. And the staggered teaching sort of reduces the ability for the lecturers or teaching staff to strike successfully, because what it's doing is it's a pandemic, it's a time of crisis, and it's a time of crisis for students, it's a time of crisis for the university, and it's a time of crisis for this very teaching staff, and a lot of them probably cannot afford right now to go on strike. But at the same time, it is also a weakened position for the university. The university is desperately needing their teaching staff right now. They rely on them heavily. In fact, if you look at how online learning has been delivered, how the asynchronous content and the online lectures have been delivered to students across this term, it's highly departmental, and that's because it's fully in control of your lecturers. It's not in control by the uni staff. I mean, to a degree, right? It seems to be way more in control of who your individual lecturer is, who your individual module leader is, right? That it seems to be more in control of that than the university setting a system that works, right? So what's happening there is, if the university is in a weakened position, they really need the teaching staff to be at the best possible position they can. And from what I'm hearing, a lot of the teaching staff are miserable with online learning, just as the students are. So perhaps a strike could work, perhaps this weakens their position. Overall, I don't know if it'll make much of a difference, but I think the university is under a lot of pressure now. from students, under a lot of pressure from the teaching staff. And I think something's got to give eventually, and something will change soon.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask a question now. People keep saying online learning is bad. Online learning doesn't work. It's looking like in term 2 we're going to have some online learning. What can we do to make it better? Noah, I'll come to you.
Well, I think it works on the basis of everyone, where possible, in the seminar groups having their cameras on, because there has been research to show that seminars where everyone has their camera on, there is more engagement, there's more likely to be student contribution, it flows more naturally. Whereas if everyone just has their cameras off and is either typing in the chat or sort of speaking intermittently, it's far more sort of stilted, it is far more awkward, and therefore sort of online learning with cameras on, it better reflects what will go on in the classroom, even though I think it can only be a small part of what working within a classroom would be like. So I suppose that's one thing to do, where awkward though it may be, actually having your camera on can lead to a better form of discussion with people being more engaged if they know they've got their camera off and they can just sort of look at their phone and get distracted in different ways.
Yeah, but no, if I don't have my camera off, how can I eat my lunch during a seminar? I'll have to pay attention. This is outrageous.
You need to.
I don't want to. Nini, I'll come to you then. What can make online learning work better for everyone?
I don't know. I don't think there's an answer to that question, because, as I've said before, there is no one size fits all in education. Right? Regardless of what direction they take, there will be a group of students that are disadvantaged by this. What they can do is, like Noah said, try to make it more interactive, having your camera on, having it more discussion based, changing the way. For me, a big thing would be the synchronous lectures, completely changing. Because for most of my modules, the synchronous lectures are the lecturer either reading the same content that the asynchronous videos were about, or responding, like doing a Q&A session with the students, where basically if you're not asking a question, you completely turn out, right? I think half my synchronous lectures seem completely, like if I'd missed almost all of my synchronous lectures, if I'd gone to maybe 1 in every 4 or 2 in every 4 of my synchronous lectures a week, I would be exactly the same than if I'd gone to all. So, but again, when I say that, that's very personal to me. I'm sure the people asking questions in those synchronous lectures find them useful. So there is no one size fits all. I simply think that a bit more interactiveness would help us all. And maybe they could make it a bit more, give the students a bit more choice. Perhaps that could be implemented departmentally. I'm not expecting each module to change like that, and it would take a very long time to properly do. But we have a month now. Maybe they could rethink a lot of the things, particularly what content they're putting in asynchronous, what content they're putting in synchronous lectures, and how they can better interact with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but until then, term 2, it looks like staggered start. With first is coming back in first week, all practical students really have to be involved coming back. Then second week, first years, and then third week, second years and beyond. Now we've talked about this conflict, but the government advice seems to indicate, except for the practical students, an exact opposite approach of bringing people back, saying that old people in the later stages of study need to be brought back earlier. Why do the universities flip that round? No, I'll come to you first.
Well, the only reason I can think of is obviously if you're in your second and third year, you're more likely to have met other people, and so hence while online learning might be awkward, you're sort of less likely to feel too self-isolated. You're likely to be living off campus, so from a social aspect, even though you're not seeing other people in person, you have knowledge of other people that are on your course, people that you're living in a flat with. Whereas I think if you're a first year, even if you've got to know people during the autumn term, it's not the same as being a second or third year where you've had a year or two of like normal life at university before COVID. So I think the only justification that the university would make is that being in person, having an in-person start earlier for first years allows more interaction that they haven't been able to enjoy during the autumn term.
Yeah. Neil, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Noah said. Also, another thing is, you asked why they would flip it around, I believe is your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another part of that is also you have to consider the fact that the freshers live on campus. So they're trying to get the people that would necessarily have to be on campus in first. I don't know why they would have to do this, but it does sort of make sense because they're trying to secure up campus a bit before allowing people that don't live on campus that'll be traveling back and forth using public transport in most cases, thereby being more exposed. So I think that's why they're trying to get the freshers in first, give them some face-to-face teaching, settle them back in, and then start introducing other people coming to campus. So in theory, that does make sense. Of course, it doesn't really, again, as I mentioned, doesn't factor in the academic rigor and the need for in-person teaching for other students. But I suppose it could be more secure COVID-wise if they did that.
Yeah, well, we'll keep following the story as it develops into term 2, and we'll find out how students are finding the new situation then. But until then, let's hope everyone can get home safely through this COVID window if you're all going home. Let's move on to our next topic. Shame on you, Warwick. Once again, Warwick is back in on the national spotlight of its failures to handle sexual assault, sexual harassment cases. After this recent petition started only a few weeks ago, the demanded Warwick do better, advertising what resources they have, and punishing people who they do in fact convict. After a series of awful failures in the past few years, first the rape chat scandal, then of course the varsity incident. So now people, I think it has to be asked, why does Warwick keep failing on this? Noah.
Well, it's impossible to understand why. I mean, you think from individuals going up alone and saying what's happened to them, their different experiences, when you had numerous people doing so, you think that alone would be enough for the university to act and ensure that help and support is available to them alongside perpetrators receiving punishments. But even if that wasn't enough, you'd have thought that national headlines, there was that BBC Three documentary, there have been stories in the Times, national newspapers, national coverage. You think that sort of effect on the university would mean that they would act appropriately, and that clearly haven't been able to. And I really don't know what it is. And I'd say that's a question you probably should ask Stuart Croft.
And it will be asked to Stuart Croft. It's one of the many questions we had submitted. I hate to keep plugging this. Raw and the Ball are interviewing Stuart Croft this Thursday. So please, if you have any questions, please do submit them to us, and we will put them to the man himself. Ninu, I want to come to you. Why do you think the university keeps failing on this?
Before I say anything, I'd like to preface this with a trigger warning. I will be talking about sexual assault in the statement in what I'm about to say. So if that triggers you, please be careful, please be aware. What I'm just saying is that it's because the university is completely out of touch and they have failed their students. Right? They've completely failed the student body of Warwick. And the fact that they have not learned after years, multiple years of headlines, there was a BBC documentary, national news coverage about their failure to properly deal with the perpetrators of sexual assault and properly appease the victims of sexual assault on their campus by their students. They have repeatedly failed, and they are completely out of touch. They haven't learned a single thing. They really haven't. Now, I'm going to bring up the famous rape chat scandal from, I believe, 2018 and early 2019. So, for those of you who somehow haven't heard of this story, I'm sure the other guests could probably do a better way of explaining it. But essentially, there was a group chat of students, men from Warwick University. All of them were on the Exec and History Society, and they said incredibly demeaning things about women. One of them said very racist things, and in general, I don't want to go into details. They spoke about sexually assaulting women. I believe they spoke about specific women as well, and they made jokes about sexually assaulting them, and they sort of glamorized it, and they even spoke about Hitler and fascism and a lot of very racist things. I believe the scandal then continued when students, instead of being expelled for life, were at least one of them, I believe, was allowed back on campus. In the next year or 2 years after that, they were allowed back on campus. And I believe this is an absolute failure and a shamble. How can campus be safe? How can this university be a safe place if people like that are allowed to continue at the university? I'm not saying we'll reach a point where sexual assault will never happen on campus. Right? As long as we continue to live in a patriarchal society, it'll always be a thing that occurs. But
but it leaves me speechless that the university can let them come back, that the university cannot handle this properly. It's a failure. They failed the students of Warwick, and I don't know what needs to happen. Either they all need to resign or they need to change it immediately, because they're completely out of touch, and it angers me, because you have made Warwick an unsafe place for women, an unsafe place for victims of sexual assault by your actions, by not doing the right thing. And all I can say is shame on you, Warwick. Shame on you.
Yeah. I think you're definitely not alone in saying that. Especially there was a march, last month, last Sunday. Unfortunately, wasn't covered because Insight wasn't on last week. But we did have a Raw News report today, produced a report, which you can find if you go on, any one of the podcast sites. Hopefully, we release the video very soon. I want to ask this. So let's sort of discuss the sort of general demands of the petition that firstly. The first thing was the university didn't do enough to sort of properly promote active consent and also the resources they have available for sexual assault survivors. Let's start with the promoting active consent. At the moment, it appears it's been widely reported that all Warwick has is sort of a Moodle test to prove you understand what consent is. What does Warwick need? What would you do? How would you promote active consent? What steps does Warwick need to be taking? Lily, I'll come to you first.
Okay, first of all, regarding the Moodle test, that's another thing that I find absolutely appalling. The social media presence of people, talking about shame on you, Warwick, talking about how there needs to be more information and, more importantly, more penalties against perpetrators and people found guilty of this kind of conduct. And the only thing the university does is have a Moodle course about it. And the fact that I didn't even know about this until someone told me about it. I use Moodle every single day, and I didn't even know this was a thing that existed. I also think you need to understand that we're all university students. I don't think a lot of the people who perpetrate this sort of behavior are unaware of what consent is. I think they need to be educated, yes, in what consent is. I think that needs to be a part of joining the university. You can't get in unless you completely understand what consent is. I think they need to advertise it better, especially at SU events. I know there haven't been a lot of big, like party type of events this year. There haven't been any really, except for the few in-person pop that we got. But next year, as things get better and as they do online events, I think they need to have disclaimers. They need to have posters up on campus. They need to be talking about what consent is. And most importantly, they need to have harsher penalties for perpetrators of this kind of behavior. If Warwick puts their foot down and says, we will not stand for this, we want to be a safe campus, and this is how we are going to promote safety. This is how we are going to protect the victims. This is how we're going to protect people. Right? I mean, I know I said women earlier. It's not just women. Even men can be victims of sexual assault. Anyone can be a victim. That is true. But, more often than not, it is a woman. And the universities completely failed them. There needs to be more education coming from victims talking about their experience. They need to have a forum. They need to have a public forum to speak, a place to talk about it, and so that we can learn more as a society, so that we can understand them better and we can understand how to prevent this going forward. Right? There needs to be an entire culture shift at Warwick, not just from the university staff, but from the students as well. We need to understand where we're going wrong, how we are allowing people to get away with this, how we are allowing people we may know, people we might be friends with, to get away with this kind of behavior. So a Moodle course is a thing that happened. It's a terrible decision, but sure, it's a step, but it's too small a step. We need so much more, and the university needs to support the students. The first thing it should do is support the students that are protesting it, support the students that are campaigning against them on social media. They need to embrace them. They need to give them a public forum. They need to listen to their demands, and they need to give in and accept them. Because who knows better about this than the actual victims? They understand this better than the rest of us because they've experienced it. And we need to stop taking up spaces for them and let them have the floor. We need to listen to them, and we need to change our culture entirely.
Yeah, Noah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Nunu's made some really powerful and important points. I think a lot of it is about, the university will have a budget, surely. If we're paying £9,000 a year in tuition fees, they're going to have a budget of money that they can spend on this, and it should be something far more adequate than just a Moodle course. Like Nunu, I use Moodle most days, but I use it for my academia, for my reading, and it's really hard to see if you're looking for a specific link, it's just not going to be available to most people. People are not going to actively check it out. And so that way it is about ways in which you can reach students. Like Nili was saying, things like posters, things like social media, that's going to have a far wider reach of the student population than just simply some Moodle course. But I think it is just sort of really shameful and horrific in every single measure. Many of the people protesting are first year students. You think, obviously we've got COVID this year, but many people regard their days at university as the best days of their life. They're coming to study a course that they love, to meet new people, hopefully meet lifelong friends too, and just have their experience, potentially their whole lives, completely ruined by such shameful incidents. It's just saddening, and it means that the university have to deal with it. It has to be help and support the people that require it, along with appropriate sanctions to people that perpetrate such acts.
Yeah, I mean, what else had to be said? I think even as an impartial Newcaster, I have to say the university's failure in this has been absolutely appalling, and we have to demand that people are demanding. Thank God, people are holding the university to account. I think one last question on this. Then you both discussed the funding the university gives to its sexual assault, sexual assault responses, and part of that is part of the university's general neglect of wellbeing funding at all. Is Warwick failing on wellbeing? And there, I'll come to you first.
Well, I mean, I've not got any specific statistics, but I presume, the demand probably has increased massively, both because of issues of sexual assault and sort of general well-being too. So whether it is like disability needs or people struggling with their mental health because of the rising academic workload or the impact of COVID and lockdown, I presume the demand is there, and whether they're managing to meet that with their budget and the support that's needed, I probably very highly doubt. And so it is really staggering and saddening to see that people that need the support the university can provide them as an institution aren't able to access it.
Yeah, Lily?
I'm just gonna say this about that. You asked me if I think well-being at Warwick is failing. I'm just gonna say, when I landed and I was in isolation for 2 weeks, and then afterwards I had to isolate again. I think you were there. We lived together. We had to isolate again, and it was very taxing on all of us. And I remember the university called me to do a well-being check on the last day of the isolation, or the day before that. And this was the entire well-being check. I said, hello? And they go, oh, this is the university. We're doing a well-being check. I go, okay, yeah. They go, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, that's great. And then just hung up. That was it. That was the entire welfare check, or well-being check. They asked me if I was okay. And that's sort of how the university treats it. I haven't had a lot of experience with wellbeing services. I've only had a few, and I've had to ask for extensions. And when we were dealing with the pandemic the first time, anything like that. And literally, it's always just been like, oh, what's wrong? Oh, no, that's bad. We'll just push your deadlines by a week. That's good. Okay, you're fine now, right? Bye. Like, they lack funding, they lack resources, they clearly don't have the resources to deal with as many students as they do, and they clearly don't seem to understand the rising trends of students needing well-being support in times like these. The pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues because we're all isolated, we're all disconnected, and we're forced to be productive in the society. We're forced, regardless of everything in the world. People are dying in insane amounts. People's lives are at risk. We're separated from our families, and we still have, the priority still needs to be that we sit and learn properly. And we can't even learn properly because we can't go to in-person classes the way we used to. We can't go to lectures the way we used to. We have to sit in our rooms and we're expected to learn. And the fact is, the university is still trying to run it like a business instead of running it like a place where people grow, develop, and learn. You're running it like a business, and we are the product. That's what we are. We are the product, right? We're paying them because I mean, it seems weird because we're paying them, but we are the product. But what they're doing is they're sort of churning us out to join companies. Like, we're paying them massive amounts, and all we have to be able to do is get employed or leave with a degree, and then they've done their job. That's what they're thinking right now. They're thinking of it like an assembly line. We go to uni, we get education, we leave with a degree, right? But they're not paying attention to the other parts of this that go into. They need to spend more on well-being services, right? That's a minimum. The fact is, more people need well-being services, more money should go to well-being services. Then perhaps if they get better, less people will need it in the future, they can maybe cut down the funding then. But right now, people need it, people really need it, and they're not dealing with it well.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, what else to say? What else is there to say? Universities, I have to be impartial. Universities very clearly failed in well-being. As someone that has sort of gone through the system for your disability, and also from last year, I think it's deeply underfunded and something that needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Hopefully, the Man to Keep Up University finally decides to listen. On our final story of today, we have this very awful transition here. I feel like this is a bad choice. Deal or no deal? We have we're discussing for the last 4 minutes of today's show. We have to cut it a bit short today. We are discussing deal or no deal. It seems Brexit is once again third way into news. After what we were told was a breakthrough of the weekend, it turns out we are still on the knife edge of no deal Brexit. According to Boris Johnson, we're now 50-50 between waking up with a deal on 1st of January or waking up in a no deal situation. Noah, actually no, Lily, you're a Brexit correspondent. I'll come to you first. How likely do you think a deal is right now?
I think that if Boris really believes the odds are 50-50, then he's talking to some other European Union. Because all the evidence suggests that unless he comes up with a deal himself that matches everything the EU wants, then only then will there be a deal. And clearly what he wants out of a deal and what the EU wants out of a deal are diametrically opposed. Everything suggests that what the EU is basically saying, like, you can't have a referendum, publicly announce you're going to leave, slam us constantly in the news, run an entire campaign about how being part of us only means more bureaucracy and more costs, and how it's, against your democracy to be a part of us, and then say, hey, we have a deal where basically we're going to continue to trade with you just like we used to. We're going to have all the benefits we had from being in the EU, but now we aren't in the EU. It just seems ridiculous what Boris is demanding. And it's just proof that he's a clown. He's a massive clown that has failed the British public. Because I don't think the odds are 50-50. I think it's 99-1. And the 99 is we're not getting a deal. We're not. Unless he pulls something out in the last minute and it goes perfectly with what the EU wants. And he somehow apologizes for all the genuine fake information he spread about them over the years, right? That the giant bus he drove around England with literal false information on it. Then maybe, and even then it's a maybe, we'll get a deal. But we're most likely not going to, and our economy is going to collapse because that man is a clown and he does not know what's good for this country.
I think when negotiating a trade deal, surely both sides have to come to some sort of middle point. It can't simply be one side completely giving in. No, I want to come to you on this.
That was the point I was going to make, Enoch. I think I'd like to think there is going to be this agreement reached. What the precise details will be, we're still, still unknown. Fish has been talked about a lot, but there are other issues too. And I think if there is this failure to reach an agreement and we end up on the 1st of January with nothing after this transition period, it will be a failure of compromise on both sides, given that they've known that they had just under a year after we left the EU on the 31st of January. Of course, they weren't to know about the huge coronavirus pandemic and the impact that would have, which is why I think the transition period should have been extended by at least 6 months to provide adequate time within the COVID era that we're currently in. But I think for a lot of people, there are millions of reasons why people voted to leave the EU. Was a free trade agreement really at the top of the agenda? yet that's all that's being discussed. I think for many it was far more about sovereignty and about the return of supposed independence to the UK. So it might almost be that if there is this huge economic damage on the 1st of January, the government are either able to blame it on the pandemic, or they'll just simply say the economic hit is worth it for the supposed sovereignty that we're going to now regain. But of course, only time will tell.
Yeah. And I think that has to be the final word on our Brexit conversation, despite there's so much to say. From what I have, he is holding up the trade deals. The UK government says the EU launched a whole bunch of new ideas on them last week, but the EU said that's completely false. The exact detail we're negotiating over, the level playing field, which we limit the amount of state aid UK governments could, UK government could, companies, but also do the same for the EU. Or fisheries, so much talk about fisheries. I want to say I'm sick of talking about fisheries. Maybe we should stop fishing. Maybe we should all just go off fish for a while. Maybe that's the solution. But stuff we would love to talk about in depth, but unfortunately we can't, because the last insight of the year is officially at an end. Noah, Ninu, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You've both been absolutely brilliant. Thank you for watching the show today. You've been an absolutely wonderful audience. I just want to repeat one last time for those of you who missed it. Stuart Croft interview this Thursday, me and Raw News and The Ball. Please give us your questions. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, or if you're watching this as a podcast, in the description there should be a link. Please, we want to give Stuart Croft a question, anything. He needs questions. Well, thank you so much for watching. Not just this show, but the entire year. It's been an absolute pleasure being Ian Makungu hosting this show. What was I saying? Absolute pleasure being your host for this show. And happy holidays, everyone. And happy New Year.